Hello, this is Shirley Adams with Program 1 in Series 2 of The Sewing Connection. The point of all this is that you can have anything you want on your terms if you sew. Sewing is your connection to the world of fashion. Well, since Series 1 I've done live seminars all over the nation, and one of the biggest questions is always, how do you make decisions on what to sew, what fabrics to buy, what techniques to use? The answer is very obvious. You use common sense dictated by what you see and like, what makes you comfortable, what you can do well, what you discover works for you. For example, in a fabric shop, I saw this silk tweed, and because of the enormous number of colors in it, it would go with a multitude of other garments I already have or would soon be making. I could tell at a glance that it would go with that deep turquoise blouse that I have, that peacock blue-green, and it would go with a pale kind of robin's egg blue ultra suede suit and a blouse. So there would span a few seasons there. It also would go for fall with a purple pantsuit. And there's a two-piece kind of turquoise dress that it does very well with. When summer comes, there's a pink summer suit that I could mix and match it with. And if there's going to be a little party in the offing, then there's a little pantsuit, bright pink, and that color's in here also. Or there's even a floral print, and those prints do go very well with a multicolored tweed this way. So whichever way I wanted to go, it was going to be very versatile. It was going to go with a lot of things I already have. Now the fiber content is silk, and that says year-round wear. It passed the squeeze test very nicely because in the shop it's not a bad idea to give it a good squeeze and release it and see what happens. And if it comes out all wrinkly, you're in for a lot of pressing all the time. But if it comes out ready to wear, then there's no reason why it can't pack and go traveling very nicely because it recovers so well. It also would dress up and down for unbelievable versatility. So silk, just a luxury fiber. Not in this case, a really practical one, which will pay me back many times over. Well, my first problem is going to be then, when I get it home, how to pre-treat it. And I'm not going to wash this. If I would, it would be washed and dried just the way I would do it later when it's made up in a garment, but I'm not going to. I'm going to dry clean it because of all the inner construction, because it's a tailored suit. So therefore, I will just pre-shrink it by using a little steam pressing on it, either at the commercial cleaners or do it yourself with the press, a wet press cloth. Get the process going just right so that you do get the shrinkage out of it, get rid of some of the extra finish. And then after you have all that pre-shrunk and ready to go, then you better do a little testing to see what kind of problems you're going to have with the seams or with any construction features. Well, in this case, I decided I knew that it raveled terribly. You can see here by what this end looks like. It really ravels. Now, this isn't necessarily a disadvantage. If you want to fringe whatever you have, because fringing is great in fashion right now, if you wanted to fringe that, fine. Use that instead of a hem and have fringes. But in this tailored suit, no. It wasn't quite the thing to do. So I wanted to eliminate that fraying. Therefore, what are my choices for eliminating that? Well, it might be any one of the several seam sealants on the market. I have a few of them down here and I tried them all. On one of them I found here that it did keep it from fraying nicely, but it also discolored a little bit and it made it real stiff, almost crackly, because these are such heavy, stiff yarns. So that one wasn't the best choice. Here I used another one. It also discolored a little bit. It feels kind of soft but rubbery, and there's a little sheen to that rubbery look because I had to use so much to keep it from fraying. Then the third one that I tried, I found it did not discolor it. It did not make it stiff. It also did not keep it from fraying. Here I can ravel it out. So that obviously is not the best choice. Seam sealants are going to be saved for something else. Now, this doesn't say that they're bad products. They're wonderful products. It's just a matter of using them on the right fabrics. So if it doesn't work on this fabric, then we're going to have to try one of the other methods at our disposal, such as serger. You always have the use of that serger. And that's going to very quickly finish all those seams so that they won't fray. And be sure that you space the threads, that they're far enough apart that it doesn't give it too heavy, too thready a look. Then another choice might be, if you didn't like the way that worked out, or if you don't have a serger, another choice might be to put it on your sewing machine and just do a little bit of zigzag there. And with a zigzagged edge, I better get a clear edge here, here I'll come down to over here, with this zigzag finish. And if you're going to zigzag, it's not a bad idea to, before you get there, I'll just put the little needle down so it keeps it in place. But it's not a bad idea, of course, to cut off all those little ends that are fraying. Give it a little haircut there before you start the zigzag process. And once it's zigzagged, it's going to hold it in place. So here again, you can overcome this problem of fraying very nicely by just zigzagging it if that's your preference. So whatever your equipment is, whatever you find can do the job best, do test it and overcome the difficulties. So then after you have that all done, then you're going to have to worry again about what other construction details are there going to be. Buttonholes, pockets, I want to have those in a suit, and yet I can see with all the fraying that that could be a problem also. For instance, I have a jacket dress over here that has a bound buttonhole in it. This one's also silk, but this is a closely woven silk, and it has finer, thinner yarns. It doesn't ravel at all, or not nearly as badly as this silk tweed does. So there I could make the bound buttonhole. But think about doing this in a tweed with those really fat yarns and how they just pop out. Look at how big those yarns are, how fat they are. If one of those yarns would pop out at the corner as I'm doing that construction, I would have a really bad time of it because the whole buttonhole would fall out. It would probably mean a trip back to the store to get another length of it so that I'd have enough to cut out a new front and start all over again. So that, I think, is perhaps not my best choice with this. Machine buttonholes, possibly, but I decided that one good direction to go maybe would be an inseam buttonhole, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. Then also the pockets that I mentioned. I want to have pockets in this, and for the same reason as the buttonholes, I decided these slash pockets with their welts, that slash pocket may not be the best choice because, again, at the corners it could fray and I could have a little problem with it. So I think I will choose not to have any slash pockets, whether they're welt or buttonhole types. Now, one thing that is going to help this a lot, there are so many fusible interfacings on the market right now, and if you haven't tried them, do. They just will do so much for you, and especially on fabrics that are going to fray so badly, because they'll hold it all together so that it won't do that fraying. So that would help to a certain extent. But still, a better answer might be inseam buttonholes and inseam pockets, and that's what I chose here. Now on this one, I actually chose a pattern that had this already in it. There's a seam that goes around here, and the buttonhole was right there in the seam, so it worked out just beautifully. There I wouldn't have to worry about any fraying at all. The same goes for the pocket, and because this was a seam right here and it had an inseam pocket in it, this was a perfect pattern choice for it. So think through all these things as you're trying to put together all the components to make this a perfect garment. So to do this, these inseam buttonholes and these inseam pockets, first of all, I am going to interface all this, as I said, with fusible interfacing. The one I chose for this is a weft type construction, and with this it works out well, I find, in any suit that I'm making, whether it's this silk tweed or a wool or an ultra suede, whatever it might be. I use this weft type fusible interfacing a lot, and it comes in darker or this sort of medium gray, or it also comes in white. But you would use press cloth or the press. Use a lot of steam, heat, pressure to get this fused just right so that it won't peel off. I just had my iron down on it briefly. I didn't even have it here, so this of course is loose, but it is tight in the middle. So I would do that to the whole front of the jacket and to maybe just the seam areas or the pocket areas of the side pieces, so that I would have all this pre-treated with the interfacing before I started constructing. And then to construct an inseam buttonhole, this is how it can be done. Now here are a couple of pieces of fabric, and this is a reversible fabric, red to blue. So I'm going to use this red button, and I want to have that inseam buttonhole just a little bit bigger than the button. Now where I'm going to put it, and naturally it was already located in the suit that I'm wearing, but this is going to be for a pattern that has no inseam buttonhole with it at all. I'm going to put it maybe in a strip down the front, and I'm going to have in between the edge of the jacket and the strip that goes down the front, that trim, kind of a Chanel look to it, I'm going to have those buttonholes. And it's just a matter of leaving spaces open, the size which will accommodate your button. So here I'm going to put the button down on the fabric, and I have my 2 layers of fabric here. This would be the little front band, and this would be my jacket. So I'm going to put the 2 here, and I'm going to mark. Now, of course, you would use a fabric marker on this, but just so that you can see it more easily, I'm going to use a pen. Don't do this on your fabric, because of course it isn't going to come off. But I'm going to use this pen, and I'll mark on this side of the button, and then I'll give it a little bit of a space and mark on this side of the button also. And this is the amount of space I want to leave open for that button. Now I'm going to, after I make this, I'm going to have to do something about the back of the buttonhole, and usually with any of these buttonholes, you just slash a little space and turn under the edges and whip it down all the way around. Well, you know I'm not going to do it with this fabric that frays so easily. Therefore, we're going to have that same seam on the back side where the lining meets the band. So I'm going to just make those same marks over here on the other side of the band and then attach a lining piece to that. So there I've made the same marks over here so that I have the very same buttonhole on both sides of this band. Now this band that I cut was approximately 3.5 inches wide. What that means is that by the time I have the seam allowance off each side and then I finish up the band, it'll end up just about 1 inch. It won't end up very large at all, just a small band down the front. So okay, first of all I'm going to do this stitching, and I want to stitch here. I better put it back on straight stitch. I want to stitch here only up to that mark that I made. And so get these little threads out here behind. And as I do that stitching up to the mark, and I'll take out this pin, and when I get to the mark, I'm going to back stitch. And then I'll start at the other side of the buttonhole and do the very same thing. I'm going to get this back in line here a little bit better. I'll back stitch up to this buttonhole, and then I'll stitch forward. There we go. And now stitch forward until you have the rest of the seam done, and so on. Okay, then after you have that seam, remember this is how it looks now. And I have this space here in between the band and the jacket. So I have that space for the buttonhole. And then I'm going to connect a lining to it. And that's going to be done in the very same way. I'll just put that lining piece along the back of it, and I'm going to do that same stitching. If you feel more comfortable with it, go ahead and pin this or do whatever you plan to make it work out just right. I'm just very quickly holding these layers together and working them this way. Do the same thing on the other side. Put it down, get the spacing there right, back stitch up to that line, and then come forward and stitch out to the end of the fabric. And so now I have that spacing on both of these. So here we go. We have the jacket, we have the band, and we have the lining over here. Now what would need to be done, and there are the 2 holes, the 2 buttonholes, and here's the other one. Now what would need to be done, you press the seams open. You fold it over this way, and then you're just going to have to whip around that buttonhole when you're finished. So it's a very easy thing to add. Here's how the outside would look with the contrast of fabrics. Here's the inside with the lining. And so that's what you can do to make buttonholes very, very easily. If you want to add inseam pockets then to this, I have this fabric down here that I better bring up and show you. Now I showed you this last time, didn't I, in that first series. I had this great fabric and I thought, what am I going to do with this? And I told you it was a little costly. Well, I'm still here with the fabric. I haven't cut into it yet, but I shall someday. But wouldn't this be a great place for those inseam buttonholes? Because I really don't want to make either bound buttonholes nor do I want to make machine buttonholes on this. Inseam would be perfect to have that sort of a band down the front, and that would just be the right way to treat it. But if I'm going to have some inseam pockets, then let's see how you do those. Now here's a skirt with some inseam pockets, and it's the very same skirt as I'm wearing. This is the same pattern. Notice here that I don't have any pockets at all because I have them in the jacket. I really didn't need them in the skirt. But here in the velvet skirt, I really wanted to have those pockets. Velvet can be a little touchy. Inseam pockets in velvet's a pretty good choice. So here's how I added those pockets to a pattern that did not have them. I first of all have already added on about an inch here, and what that inch is for, I better bring my skirt up here again, is if you can see in that pocket a little bit, you don't want to see lining fabric, you want to see the same velvet. So that's what that inch is that I added, just so that that's all you'll see when you look inside. Now way inside there is a lining fabric, but it's in there so far you can't see it because I've added on this little extra inch here. So okay, I'm going to add it on here, and where this is, it's a matter of putting my hands in place where I want this pocket to be and seeing exactly where it needs to be. So that's how I got this little spacing up here at the top. Then after I have this, I'm going to need some more, which is going to be for my pocket piece. And this will be cut out of another fabric, a lining fabric. But with this pocket piece, the way I got this pattern was just to put my hand in the pocket and kind of trace around it. How big do I need that to be? Let's be practical about it. And that's how big I need it to be if I'm going to put my hand in the pocket. Here would be the seam coming across here. I'd want about that much. So that's why I have this purple piece. I would just tape them all together. Then where this meets the side back, this is just a little front piece that comes up to about here. And then the rest of the skirt is a side, back, and a back all in one piece. I would do the same for the rest of it, for the back piece. I would just add that big wide inch there so that I wouldn't be able to see inside, and then I'd use this same pattern to just make the lining pocket and one side, or one layer for each side. So it's that easy to make that pocket, to add it to a skirt. If I wanted to add a pocket to a jacket, that really isn't any more difficult. Here's one where I added it to a shirt up here in the shoulder area. And you can see this is an inseam pocket, and the reason I did it here is because I wanted to do a little something with the contrast of stripes. And I thought as long as I had this seam going across and having the stripes meet there, I might as well just pipe that and put a little inseam pocket there. So it's nothing that's usable. It's strictly decorative up there because in that position you certainly can't use a pocket. Here's another one. It's a jacket, and I did add these. These inseam pockets were not in the pattern. I put them there because it seemed like a good place to put them. This pattern actually had patch pockets on it, and I decided I would rather have the inseam pockets. So you can see it's going to be a matter of putting a seam wherever you want it and then adding the pockets to it. Well, I'm going to show you. This is an ultra leather jacket here. Here's another one. This is a very thin fabric, and it has a leathery look. It really looks like leather. It is not. It's a very thin, relatively inexpensive fabric, but it's great for when those teenagers, for instance, want something leather and you think, you're going to ruin it very easily. Here's a nice, inexpensive substitute for that purpose, perhaps. Well, this isn't for a teenager. It's for me. It has pants and this jacket, and what I wanted to have is an inseam pocket here somewhere. So what I did first of all is just hold this pattern up against me to decide where that pocket needs to be. So if I have the pattern up here, I put my hand in a pretend pocket. Here's my hand down in the pocket, and with that hand in it, then I decided, okay, let's make a mark with a pen. Let's make a mark on this side of my hand and that side of my hand, and let's make another mark right here where my finger points down at the bottom. And the reason for this is I want to know how big that pocket has to be. So those 3 marks I have marked on this pattern piece, one here for each side of my hand and one down here where my fingers point, and my hand just slips very nicely into that pocket. Now what I need to do is have 2 pieces here, the upper piece on this jacket and the lower piece. And so using this pattern piece, and I'll get my skirt here out of the way, and in fact I'll make a little room for action here. Okay, with this pattern piece, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw that line, these 2 marks that I made on each side of my hand. I'm going to draw a line connecting those 2 little marks, so it's just a straight line using a yardstick here. So it was drawing a line here and there so that I know where the fold line's going to be, where the seam's going to be. So this is the way you start. And then after I had that done, I wanted to take a piece of tissue paper, and with that tissue on top here, and I'm just getting the front and the bottom to line up there, just a square piece of paper, I'm going to fold this back to where I had that line, or else I can see through it. It's tissue after all. I can see through it, and I already have pre-folded a line here, but that's because I could see through here. I knew where the line was, so I made a couple little marks, one at the top and one at the bottom. and simply did a fold here, and then I'm going to put it back down on my jacket right in line where I want that seam to be. And after I have this in place, I'm going to get, this is what the jacket will look like when it's all finished. You can see as I compare it with this jacket that's done here, or that's in process, but you can see here's the lower part, here's the upper part. I'm just going to get this lower part up out of the way so that I can draw my seams, and I'll put a little pin in there to hold it slightly. Okay, I know that here's where I want my pocket to start and stop, right about here. And right about here is where my finger was. I can see through the tissue. So I want to draw a pocket around here. It's just sort of this shape. And the reason I'm drawing my pocket up like this instead of just around where my hand is because it'll hang better inside the jacket if there's a straight line here that comes up and connects with the seam. So is this easy for you? Can you do that? Okay. So my hand's going to fit in there nicely. Then after I have that done, I can see I don't want this much down here. That's going to be cut off. That goes. I don't want this because that's where the pattern ends. This goes. So what I have left is this much over here. And I'm going to add to this a seam allowance. So there's 5/8 for a seam allowance, and I'm going to cut around here, adding 5/8 at the same time. Okay, and I'll cut around here, adding 5/8. Now you would do this much more carefully. I'm trying to do this as quickly as possible so that I get it all in our allotted time. But this is throwaway. I'm not going to use it at all. Now what I could use these pieces here for is a template, just to save, to use later to duplicate this if I wanted to. If I wanted to use the same pattern again and do the exact thing again, I would save this piece and this piece for a little template to put on later. This is what I did, in fact, when I made the pink leathery looking jacket. Here are the little templates I cut off, and you can see where these fit. If I put them here on my pattern, one of them fits here and one of them fits down here. So you can see this is the upper part of the pattern. Here's the part up here and the pocket that goes right on through. Now remember, in the velvet skirt I added some lining fabric for the pocket. Well, here I'm not going to, because this is so thin that I'm really going to, inside this pocket, just use this same leathery looking fabric and cut the whole thing out of this. So here is the top part of the jacket, which comes on down and makes the whole pocket here. Here's the top. I'll put it in the right position so you can see. So can you see that this is the very same thing transposed that you see down here? Here's what has been removed, this corner and this corner from these two corners. So that's the top part. The bottom part then, here's the tissue paper for the bottom part, and this one is what you see here, plus the pocket that folds down on the inside. Then after I have these all cut out, it's very easy to stitch this. It's just a matter of stitching over to the point where the pocket starts, stitching around, and down out to the edge. That easily you can make a pocket, just adding it to any pattern you want to. Now what I also did with this to beef it up a little bit is add some fusible interfacing to the entire inside of it. Every inch of it inside has this interfacing fused in place. On a later show we're going to talk about interfacing, so I won't elaborate on that right now. But that's good use for a fusible interfacing, to beef up a fabric that you don't want quite as thin, that you really want heavier, because that gave it a more leathery look by interfacing the whole thing. Well, after I have that stitched down and around and across, then what I'm going to do is press it in place, of course, press the pocket pieces down, and I want to, just right here across the open pocket, I want to do some top stitching there on machine, just from here to here. And after that's done, I'm going to pull those threads through to the back side and tie a knot there. You don't want to top stitch, or you don't want to back stitch when you top stitch, because it'll show. So do pull those to the back side. And then after you have that knot tied, then you just start here and continue the rest. Just starting wherever you left off with your last stitch is where you put the needle in to start with the new stitch and finish off the top stitching. And after you have that pocket in, then you just go ahead and treat it as one piece of fabric the way it was originally. There's nothing different there once you get the pocket in. Now this has possibly taken me longer to tell you about it than it actually does to do it, because it's a very quick, easy process. Do it on something that doesn't make that much difference to you at first. to learn on it and to make yourself realize how easy it is. And then you can proceed with the greatest of ease on any further projects thereafter. Now, if you're going to do this frequently, it's a good idea to back these patterns. And these are original patterns that I have here. If you're going to write to ask what pattern number it is my original pattern. And so what I have done is back this. I like to back this with interfacing also. And what makes this nice then for putting it on any fabric and cutting is it doesn't move. It kind of clings by having this fusible interfacing on. So I have my permanent patterns here that I can use repeatedly, and that'll make it easy if I want to repeat the process later. Well, you can see that you can do this. It is easy. And now that we have the buttonholes all done, and now that we have the pockets, how do you change a skirt pattern so that it hangs perfectly on your body? Come join me next time, and we'll solve that mystery.